Bitcoin is about to take over the $350 trillion housing market, but it's not without the potential of some very, very possible issues underneath the hood that could cause another major recession. And it all could be with BlackRock and Larry Fink behind it all. But first, let's get into the positive news that we have here. First, that Fannie and Freddie Mae, if for those of you who are not American, those are the two biggest entities where you can now hold Bitcoin and count that towards mortgages. Now, this is absolutely massive and monumental because prior to this ruling, if you held Bitcoin in any way, shape, or form, you could not count that as assets towards your ability to gain a home. So Bitcoin can now help you, fulfill that American dream. But there is some issues that we see here, right? Even though we've got a historic day in the cryptocurrency industry where the mortgage industry and Fannie and Freddie Mac are now positioned to involve cryptocurrencies and mortgages, President Trump is making USA the crypto capital world. And Michael Saylor has come out and said that US mortgage industry leads and as the global banking industry will follow. But there's a caveat here. You need to give ownership of your Bitcoin to a US regulated exchange for it to be counted towards this mortgage. Now, this is what is very interesting, right? Because they're saying, hey, you cannot have your Bitcoin in self custody in order to count it towards a mortgage or, towards some of your assets. Now, the interesting aspect of all of this is not just, hey, that I want to hold Bitcoin in self custody, which I am a huge proponent of. I think that's what everybody that should be doing. But what is the number one place where retail is buying Bitcoin right now? And that is BlackRock, the IBIT ETF. And BlackRock owns a large percentage of mortgages in the United States. So it's hard to pinpoint, right, on the exact percentage of all mortgages of BlackRock, but it's a major player holding significant stakes in mortgage-related companies that are investing heavily in real estate, right? So BlackRock does not necessarily own individual houses, but it has trillions of dollars under management. It heavily invests in the US residential real estate market with 120 billion allocated to this sector, including investments in new construction and multifamily. And it owns a major stake in mortgage companies such as this, what you're seeing right here, 9.2%. And what is its connection in the mortgage market, right? It has mortgage-backed securities, providing capital for both home purchases and new construction. Now, what happened in 2008? For those of you who don't know, the banks issued massive amounts of mortgage-backed securities, which would give these terrible mortgages. You'd have a teacher getting an $800,000 mortgage that, was making like $40,000 or $30,000 a year. So something that they definitely could not afford, but they were getting approved like that immediately at the snap of a hat. BlackRock was at the root of all of that in 2008 because they own majority of mortgage-backed securities. Now, what does BlackRock also own? They own a large percentage, or in fact, the largest percentage in the Bitcoin ETF market, where the BlackRock ETF now has allegedly 3.25% of the overall Bitcoin supply, right? Where it's nearing the $70 billion mark. And this is from earlier this year. This was from just last week, where we're having BlackRock controlling 54.7% of these market shares. Now, why is BlackRock's connection to all of this a little bit fishy? Not only should we not trust Larry Fink, but it's a big connection with what I've been showing you guys for quite some time. It's that Coinbase and BlackRock have been kind of at odds here, where BlackRock has been almost convicting Coinbase of issuing them paper Bitcoin. Now, BlackRock in their auditing system has not necessarily gone through and done all this, auditing towards this paper Bitcoin fiasco that I keep bringing up to you guys. But Coinbase has 9 of the 11 Bitcoin ETFs. They're custodying all of them. The only other player is Anchorage, and Anchorage is a very small player. Fidelity custodies their own. They hold their own keys. So if you're looking for an ETF, I would trust one that does their own custodian. But Coinbase having a big issue or a big player in all of this, and essentially, being in the inner workings in the Donald Trump cabinet and everything, and Larry Fink being up there as well, it is kind of fishy that they're saying, hey, we cannot count any of this for self-custody. Although it unlocks a $350 trillion market to now, I guess, be partnered with Bitcoin, so to speak, because you can count that towards a mortgage. It is a little sketchy that we're seeing this, right? Because what have we had before, right? We have now JPMorgan doing one of the biggest backflips we've seen in Bitcoin that is letting their clients use their spot Bitcoin ETFs to loan collateral, right? And then what else do we have here? We have the housing market looking like a potential crash. Now, this isn't just headlines from Green Candle saying, hey, this is all doom and gloom. What I think is this is a big plan from Jerome Powell and the overarching mother lords of the Fed, who are looking at this scenario and saying, hey, right, the housing market is not looking strong. We think that we saved the housing market by raising interest rates and keeping it so people weren't selling off their houses earlier this year when we saw, interest or when we saw inflation running rampant, right? Jerome Powell came out and said that we think that we saved the housing market. So what's going to happen when they lower interest rates? Well, there's either going to be a huge sell-off or, there's going to be some issues. But what we're seeing right now is that there's these headlines going on that's saying the housing market is slowing dramatically. They're talking about Florida, one of the top states in the United States for housing, looking like another crash in 2008. Now, what did we see not too long ago during the cerveza sickness, right? Just 4.5 years ago, we saw that everybody was flocking to Florida, Nashville, Texas, all of these different states that stayed relatively open. And now we're seeing either a massive mass exodus that we aren't accounting for. I mean, this article goes into detail about how 80% of the people that move down here are looking to move out and flock away from Florida. So the massive influx that we saw is now being, a little bit of a negative effect on the overall housing market, especially in the state of Florida. And then on top of it, we're saying, hey, we are going to allow you to use Bitcoin as collateral. So this seems like this is going to be a big giant cocktail concoction that is going to lead to some craziness in the housing markets, to say the least. I mean, we have JPMorgan now looking at this, and as we said, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, does not, quote, own the stock market as controlling it, but they have $11.5 trillion in assets. They control majority of the ETFs. They have institutional ownership, and they have influence but not control. While BlackRock's are substantial, they do not have absolute control over the market. However, their investment decisions and voting power in shareholders' meetings can influence the directions of companies and the market, right? And so, now we have Jerome Powell saying, hey, we might lower interest rates on top of all of this, right? Because we have some worry in the housing market. Maybe it's time to cut interest rates if we have some future trade deals that open all of this. But like I say before, folks, you should not be trusting these guys to custody your Bitcoin, because we have Jamie Dimon and Larry Fink, who were actually extremely bearish on Bitcoin prior. I mean, we had Larry Fink, look at this, July 15th, 2024, demand a 63 flip because Now, Larry Fink, all of a sudden less than a year ago, said Bitcoin is legitimate. So because Larry Fink now says Bitcoin is legitimate, we now have 12 or 13 ETFs in the United States, and now you can use it for mortgages, and all of this happened within less than a year. Okay. But now they want us to say, on top of it, they're not just saying, hey, Bitcoin is legitimate. They're saying, give us your Bitcoin so it can be legitimate. Right. So this should be something that you guys should be keeping a extremely close eye on. And on top of it all, be very cautious about all of this, because they weren't about all of this freedom technology and all the cypherpunks really going out and buying this funny internet money just a year ago. In fact, Jamie Dimon is still extremely bearish on all of this. But Larry Fink, Uncle Larry Fink, on the other hand, he's like, hey, you know what? I see this is a real money making tool. So what can we do? We own majority of the stock market. We have ETF dominance. So we're going to offer an ETF. And in fact, it's been the most successful ETF launch in history. But it's not enough, because you know why? We want to create in-kind ETFs where you guys can donate or deposit your Bitcoin. And then we'll say you can use that as collateral for mortgages. You could use that as collateral for loans. You can use that to now buy a house. Don't you want a white picket fence? Don't you want to live off the American dream? Don't you want to see this? Don't you want to use your Bitcoin to change your life? Right? So they're going to be promoting all these different messages. But the reality is they aren't going to say, hey, Bitcoin is legitimate if you have it in cold storage. It's just Bitcoin being here, right? So I, for one, am going to be a huge proponent of you guys not keeping Bitcoin on an ETF. And I encourage you guys to keep it in cold storage. This is why I've partnered with my friends over at the Bitcoin Well. They literally do not give you an option to custody on their platform. They don't want any of that risk themselves. So go to bitcoinwell.com/green candle. You can sign up and win 500 Wishing Well tokens. These 500 Wishing Well tokens will give you a chance to play in this Wishing Well. And then once you buy Bitcoin, same thing. So you're giving you two chances. All you got to do is buy some Bitcoin, which you should be doing already. And then you have a chance to win 1 million sats. So make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button with the bell notification so you know I am going live. And then boom, you could win over 500 sats, 509 sats here today. You could win more sats every time you come to a Green Candle live stream. So make sure you guys are smoking that like and hitting that subscribe button. But if you missed that opportunity, go to bitcoinwell.com/green candle, sign up here. This is where you'll earn the 500 Wishing Well tokens. And if you got 50K smackers, scroll on down and utilize the Bitcoin Well Infinite. And then, of course, you can store it using a Bitbox. So you go to bitbox.swiss/green candle. You go buy now. You can go to the new Nova that they just unleashed here. It's got a great screen. It's very user friendly. It's got additional iPhone support. You can plug it directly into your iPhone. I mean, these guys are working so hard to bring you guys the best available software. So I encourage you guys to check that out. And you could use promo code Green Candle to get 5% off your entire order. And then, you can back up your seed phrase here in the Steel wallet as well. So I encourage you guys to do that. But let's get back to the point, right? Uncle Larry. Uncle Larry with his ETF dominance. Why are they saying, hey, this thing is now legitimate, right? You got to ask yourself. Why this thing could be potentially legitimate. And let's check out what we got going on in the chat. Down Under Blues says he wants an in-ground pool to go inside that white picket fence. Hey, man, just keep buying Bitcoin and stacking it up. But hey, I encourage you to do it in cold storage, Down Under Blues. I don't think you guys should be doing that in the ETFs or anything else. Or at least, you know what, if you're looking for it, there's other collateral programs. You can get some loans to do that maybe on a different way. But I encourage you to be very cautious when you're looking at these new products. You got to go through the fine tooth and comb. These guys don't know what's going on. And you're right, BlackRock does own everything. I mean, they own majority of the stock market. They own majority of the ETF market. We've got McLovin, the GOAT here, down under saying, I owe him $20. Yeah, exactly. Right. George over here saying, is there a way to prove BlackRock has a 1-to-1 real back BTC behind that paper? Somebody needs to do proof of reserve with Coinbase, period. I agree 1,000% here, George. And the problem is that nobody has done that just yet. And that it's all a trust me, bro. And, when it comes to mortgages, JPMorgan also has a giant moat here. And the moat doesn't seem to be going away. JPMorgan's dominance keeps reigning through. They're the most dominant bank in the U.S. with lending, investment, commercial, credit card, retail, asset, and wealth management franchises. It just keeps going on and on. So if JP Morgan is saying, hey, you know what? We're letting our clients use these spot Bitcoin ETFs for loan collateral. Makes you think, did they influence all of this? Because they're saying, hey, we can use the ETFs as loan collateral. Is the United States going to follow suit? And JP Morgan is the largest bank in the United States by asset and is a dominant force in many financial sectors. It's in fact the biggest bank outside of China. And so it's not even really relatively close, the differences between the banks. I mean, if you look at it in the United States, we've got maybe, some of these guys here with like, the Chinese banks and everything, but we don't have anything outside of that is, not necessarily these big players, right? Like we've got the Chinese bank, we've got Wells Fargo, we've got all these other things, but it's absolutely massive, the JP Morgan dominance that we're seeing, right? So this dominance cannot be understated, to say the very least. Because if JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon start to come out and say what the Fed chairs are saying, we're going to see this number here, this 24.8% chance of us cutting interest rates go dramatically down. We're going to see once that interest rates start to go down and mortgage rates start to go down, people are going to want to buy more homes. Now, if they're going to want to buy more homes, well, what are they going to need? They're going to need some assets. They're going to need some collateral. So these guys are all looking at the overall macro scope, and I don't think anything is a coincidence. They're seeing a few things, right? Florida's housing market's looking terrible. Trump and all of the Fed chairs outside of Jerome Powell are basically yelling at Jerome Powell saying, hey, you need to lower interest rates. You need to do it now. And what is Jerome Powell doing? He looks like he's heading steady here. So what is that going to do? That's going to keep mortgage rates high, so then you can start to develop these products. Maybe we've got a couple months to go through and really look at this thing. But this is something that is very interesting. And then when we have those interest rates come down, we're going to have people starting to flock. And what else are we going to see? We usually start to see Bitcoin run. We usually start to see Bitcoin skyrocket in flight. Boom! Afternoon delight. Absolutely take off. So when Bitcoin starts to take off, we're going to see this 170 or 107,000 number really start to go up, right? So then we're going to have Bitcoin running potentially in a bull market. And then we're going to have a bunch of Bitcoiners who are going to want to start to enjoy their life. Maybe 100,000 was their number before, but hey, if I could use Bitcoin as potentially, proof of assets here, so we can buy a nice home, we could improve our life. We'll deposit it. BlackRock's like, hey, give me your Bitcoin. I'll take it here. And Jamie Dimon's like, you know what? Yeah, put it in the ETF. We'll go with BlackRock. Jamie Dimon, the United States, all these guys. Hey, you know what? We haven't tried to screw you guys over before. We haven't tried to dominate any other market before. So just deposit all your Bitcoin. Give it to me here. We're all good. We'll get you a house. We'll get you a depreciating house where the floors are going to fall apart. You know what? You're going to have to dump more and more money. And then at the end of the day, even though you had that collateral, that very nice collateral you guys got. What else do we got here? Well, we got your Bitcoin. We got your Bitcoin while you're going to stay house broke. So this is going to be a very interesting aspect that we start to see play out. And I always caution you guys to not put your Bitcoin with Uncle Larry Fink at BlackRock, because, this could be ruining the crypto scene, right? I think this is potentially the biggest pitfall, the single biggest crash that we could ever have. It would be bigger than FTX. It would be bigger than anything we've seen before. It would be bigger than any bank run in history if Coinbase is not buying the Bitcoin. But you know what? Hey, it was such a rumor that Brian Armstrong had to address it. And what I've been saying for years on this channel, for you guys who have been coming around, when there's smoke, there is fire. And so I'm always anticipating and always watching these things. And these rumors, look, maybe there's no basis to it, but the fact that an article is being written about it, the fact that Brian Armstrong is actually addressing it, and Coinbase has been hacked multiple times. They've been hacked. Okay, maybe they haven't lost their keys, maybe because they don't have them, who knows? But the Coinbase has, given up customer data. So what else have they potentially given up, right? They're saying, hey, it's just paranoid Bitcoin investors on Coinbase. But this is why we preach self-custody, because you know what? They're not counting self-custodied Bitcoin as an asset. They are not counting that, right? So why would they not count self-custodied Bitcoin as an asset for you to potentially buy a home if they want you to buy a home, right? So these are going to be very interesting. This is a huge detail here. Each enterprise is directed to consider only cryptocurrency assets that can be evidenced and stored on a U.S. regulated centralized exchange. See? So that's the biggest part here, right? So it has to be a centralized US regulated exchange. So they need to keep your Bitcoin on their exchanges. They need to keep a very close eye of what you have. They want to know everything that you have. So at the end of the day, you guys need to be very cautious. And I encourage all of you guys to hold Bitcoin in cold storage. And I also encourage all you guys to smoke that like Cheech and Chong. We haven't seen All Nighter Hider here in a minute. And hit that subscribe button. But we do have McLovin here in the chat. So I always appreciate you coming on. But the dominance that we're seeing from BlackRock, the dominance we see in JPMorgan, these guys have all flipped on Bitcoin all of the sudden, and it doesn't leave me to fully embrace them and say, hey, come to Papa, come here to the Bitcoin space. It always makes me very cautious as to seeing these guys all of a sudden get into Bitcoin. Like, what shouldn't we be very wary of these guys? I definitely think we should. So thank you guys all from coming in. And yeah, hey, I mean, I'm actually currently at a friend's house here in Finland. So I am streaming, and he's got me in this little apartment. I got a comment the other day when I was at an Airbnb saying I was in the most single guy apartment they'd ever seen, and it was a single bedroom Airbnb. This might beat it, honestly. This might beat it, because it's literally a bed on the floor, and I got a desk over here. But I always appreciate friends putting me up. Dub is saying they flipped on making money on Bitcoin, not what Bitcoin is all about. And that is the point right here. This should be screamed from the rooftops. When you tell your friends to buy Bitcoin, you need to tell them and preach them the message. Bitcoin's all about personal freedom, being your own bank, self-custody, really holding all of these things, holding the true asset of Bitcoin. Now, all of these guys, they're money hungry, and they're looking to get more and more money as possible and make more money off of you. That's their only incentive. So they want to do that. And what are they saying? Hey, we're going to hold all your Bitcoin in a centralized US regulated exchange. So we know where it is. We know where it goes. And I've said this from the beginning of time, basically, since the US started attacking Bitcoin, that I never really thought that the United States hated Bitcoin. They just wanted to know wherever you're going to send it. So that's why they're attacking KYC. That's why they're attacking all these different things. So I'm going to be covering this story very, very closely. So make sure you guys are hitting that like button and hitting that subscribe button. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and I'll see you guys all at the next one.